Hey Quilty friends, I'm Kristen and welcome back to my channel, Quilter Chris. And today we're diving in to the wonderful world of pre-cut fabric. They're colorful, they're put together in these beautiful combinations, they're irresistible. Have you ever wondered what a jelly roll is? Or why they have these names? We're going to talk about all of this and the measurements and why we even have precuts and what are they. So we're going to talk about fat quarters, okay? And so the anatomy of a fat quarter bundle. So a fat quarter bundle, sometimes it's wrapped in plastic, especially if you order it online. Sometimes it's just open. I suggest if they are wrapped in plastic, you leave them in plastic unless you're going to use it right away, because that keeps the dust off of them. This one I've had for several years, and I did take the plastic off for this video, but normally I leave it on. So what does this tell us? Okay, so this will have a label on it, and it will have the fabric manufacturer. In this case, it's Moda. Sometimes they're Riley Blake, sometimes they're Art Gallery. There's a bunch of fabric manufacturers, but this one is Moda. Now, it also tells you the name of the fabric line. In this case, it's Shine On by Bonnie and Camille. Bonnie and Camille are the fabric designers. That is important because oftentimes fabric lines from the same designer will go with each other. So these are both from the same designer, and you can see that several of the colors are very similar. So that's an important note to remember. On the back, it will tell you if it is a fat eighth or a fat quarter bundle. So the ones that I have happen to be fat eighth bundles, but there are fat quarter bundles as well. So fat eighth bundles are a little cheaper. And this is still the same for both fat eighths and fat quarters. Also, on many of the fat quarter bundles, I don't know if they're on all of them, but it lists the SKUs for all the colors. And so that way, if you need a replacement or additional yardage, you can go to the SKU list to get it. And so several of my Moda ones do have that. Not all of them have it. Sometimes there's a cardboard piece in the bottom and it will be there, but a lot of them do have it. If your bundle doesn't have it and you want more fabric, you can often go on Etsy, search the fabric line, and you'll be able to find more fabric. So why a fat quarter versus just a normal quarter of a yard fabric? So fat quarters come from when you have a 1 yard piece of fabric that's 36 by 44, and we'll have some visuals up for you because we're all visual people. When you have that yard and you cut a quarter of it, you end up with this very skinny piece of fabric. It's slightly bigger than a jelly roll, but it's not big enough to cut out some of those larger shapes. So a fat quarter was developed. Now this was developed decades ago, the fat quarters. And so it ends up being a square piece of the fabric as opposed to a long skinny piece. And because quilts are often colorful, having multiple fabrics in that same line, that's where the fat quarter bundle came from. Now, before Moda started doing this in the early 2000s, where they named them fun names and they started putting whole lines of fabric together. Before this, quilt shop owners would often put their favorite fabrics together in a bundle, and it was still a fat quarter bundle. So the name of this hasn't changed, just kind of the marketing, if you will, has changed on it. Okay? So what's the difference between a fat quarter and a fat eighth? About an eighth of a fabric. So 2 fat eighths make 1 fat quarter is kind of the idea of that. And so basically it's a way for you to get a fat eighth bundle, get you the same array of fabrics, the same multiple fabrics, but a little bit smaller. Now, a fat quarter bundle, recently prices have gone up. When I was looking at Fat Quarter Shop today, they mini fat quarter bundles were $150. And that's for about 30 to 40 fat quarters. You absolutely can make a whole quilt with that. You might need some extra if you're making a queen size quilt, but you with a large fat quarter bundle that's with 30 or 40 fabrics, you can make a sizable quilt with that. I have made many with that. And you may be able to take the extras after you've cut your pieces and piece them together and make a border and use this entire thing and make a quilt that's pretty close to a queen size. After fat quarters and fat eighths, where do we go from there? Well, at that point, there's a lot of other different pre-cuts you can get that might be much more budget conscious than the $75 to $150 it would cost for a bundle like this. So let's talk about jelly rolls and their fun little name. Mentioned in the early 2000s, Moda, who is a fabric manufacturer, they started as a marketing campaign. They started to name their pre-cuts by these cute edible names. So we had jelly rolls and layer cakes and just so many fun names for all these different sizes. And so while that's great, it can get confusing because while Moda calls them all these yummy names, Riley Blake calls them a 10 stacker or a 5. And there's no standardized amount of fabric in each of these. Each fabric manufacturer sets their own standardization. So with Moda, a layer cake might be 42 pieces of fabric most of the time, while a 10 stacker with Riley Blake might be only 30 pieces of fabric. So you want to make sure that you're reading those labels. So moving on, we're talking about jelly rolls. So jelly rolls are super popular, and they can be, it depends on if you're getting them on sale or not. They can be about, I would say, from $30 to $50, depending on the designer, the manufacturer, the popularity of the fabric, the colors, lots of different things. So a jelly roll is usually 40 pieces, sometimes 42 pieces of 2.5-inch strips. And so this one says that it is 40 pieces and 2.8 yards, and that will include duplicates, and it's rolled up. And you pull that out and it will be a 2.5-inch strip of fabric. Now you can get these in fabric lines like this one is, and you can get them in this size, which is the most popular and most common. Sometimes there's mini jelly rolls, and you can see it's a little bit smaller. This is one I got in a sew sampler box from Fat Quarter Shop, and it's a little bit smaller, but still lots of different kinds of fabric. So what can you use these strips for? So these are 2.5-inch strips, which also happens to coincide with what the size I make my binding. So if you get this all in one color, maybe usually solids is when it comes in all in one color, you can sew that together and you have your binding. All you have to do is iron it and sew it on. Perfect. You can also use this for other crafts needing 2.5 cuts. These are fun to make jelly roll rugs with, and they are fun. There's jelly roll race quilts where you sew all the strips together and you make a full quilt. So these are super popular. They are way more budget friendly, and you can use them in a lot of different projects besides just quilting. Next, we're going to talk about layer cakes. Now, we already talked about these a little bit, but I wanted to talk about them a little bit more. So these are 10-inch pieces of one fabric line. This is an older one, but you can see it has many different colors in there that all go together. This is by Moda. And so on the back here, if you can see, it lists all the SKUs, and it lists several ways that you can cut this up and use it in a quilt. And so it gives you lots of ideas and how to find that. Additionally, Moda has a online blog. I think it's called The Bakery. I'll look it up and post it on the screen. But they have an online, it will give you a list of quilts, free patterns that you can make based on the size of the pre-cut that you have. But it's a website run by Moda, and so it's using it based on Moda pre-cuts. Remember, other fabric designers have pre-cuts of the same size, but there might not be the same amount of fabric. Layer cakes also sometimes come in rolls like this one. Usually that's when they have less fabric in them. So usually this isn't 40 pieces of fabric like the flat ones are. They're just rolled up, but they still look pretty in your sewing room. Another great idea for when you are organizing your scraps, and if you want to make your own quilt kits, you can cut up your scraps into fabric that you feel goes together. It doesn't have to be the same line. You just have to like the fabric together, and then you put it together in your own quilt kit, and you could make little rows like this. Another super popular pick is charm packs. And again, I have some older ones here that I was going to show you. So these are 5-inch squares. And they are just like the other ones. They're the whole fabric line. They are in these two, there's about 42 squares. It tells you on the back. It also gives you all the SKU numbers on the back, which is important. Even if you think that a certain fabric line is too old or they might not have it around, sometimes some of these prints, not always, sometimes these prints are only run once, but sometimes some of these prints end up being put in other fabric lines. And so if it's something you need for your quilt, it's great to be able to look up the SKU number. This is a Riley Blake. It is also they call them 5-inch stacker. Moda calls them charm packs. Riley Blake calls them 5-inch stackers. Some manufacturers may just call them 5-inch squares. It doesn't matter. They're the same cut size. In this case, they both have 42 squares in them, but you might want to check on the back. Now, some quilt stores will come out with their own pre-cuts, or sometimes certain quilt stores will have a working relationship with a manufacturer. So a great example of this is Moda Fabrics and Fat Quarter Shop. So they're both there in Texas, and they have a really good relationship. So a few years ago, I think it was maybe about 10 years ago, Fat Quarter Shop came out with their own pre-cut. And this is by Moda. You can only get it at Fat Quarter Shop. And these are called Jolly Bars. And they are half of a layer cake. Like this. So these are fun because they come with a pattern inside here for you to make them. You could also, if something called for 2 charm packs, because this is the same as 2 charm packs. So if something called for 2 charm packs, one of these would work. So, as we mentioned, there are lots of different pre-cuts. Different manufacturers can have different names for their pre-cuts. Make sure when you're buying your pre-cuts that you keep an eye out. If you have a quilt in mind, keep an eye out for how much fabric that needs, because most of the pre-cuts, aside from a fat quarter bundle, most of the pre-cuts are only between 2 or 3 yards. So if you want to make a queen-sized quilt, you're probably going to need at least 2 of the pre-cut, maybe more. Also, make sure you read on the back of the pre-cut how many pieces of fabric are actually in there, because different manufacturers will put different ones on there. And remember, you can use your own scraps to cut up and make your own quilts and your own pre-cuts. Anyway, I hope you all really enjoyed this video. If you found it helpful, or you have any comments or a certain pre-cut that you love, I would love to hear from you. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye now.